Have you ever ended your day feeling like you ran a marathon, but you barely even moved? You weren't physically active, yet your body felt heavy. Your thoughts wouldn't slow down, your chest felt tight, and even the simplest conversation left you drained. That isn't tiredness. That's emotional exhaustion. And the worst part is, you may not even realize it, because it often hides behind normal, everyday habits, like overanalyzing things you should have let go of hours ago. Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I want to take you into a part of your mind that rarely rests, yet you never stop feeding it: overanalysis. You might not recognize it, but overanalyzing is a silent emotional killer. It wears no mask, leaves no wounds, and yet it drains you bit by bit until you no longer feel like yourself. It's when your mind turns every memory into a problem, every word into a threat, and every pause into rejection. You're not tired from life. You're tired from thinking about life too much. Let's take a simple example. Someone you care about sends a short reply to your long, vulnerable message. They just say, "I'm okay." Now pause. What happens next? If you're emotionally exhausted, your brain doesn't stop at, "They were probably busy." No, it spirals into 1,000 directions. Did I say too much? Did I make them uncomfortable? Are they upset with me? Was that too needy of me? You replay the message over and over, checking their tone, rereading your own words, and try decode silence like it's a riddle. This, right here, is overanalysis. It begins as a small spark, but quickly turns into wildfire. You become emotionally stuck in imaginary situations that never happened, and you live out entire confrontations in your head with people who don't even know you're upset. You see, the brain is designed to protect you, to scan for danger, to evaluate risk, and to prepare you for survival. But emotional exhaustion begins when the brain never stops scanning. And instead of saving you from danger, it starts creating it. Here's the psychology behind it. Overanalyzing is a form of emotional control. When you don't feel emotionally safe, your mind tries to take control by thinking everything through. It's your brain's attempt to avoid emotional pain. If I figure out, I won't get hurt. If I see it coming, I'll be ready. But here's the truth. No amount of thinking can protect you from feelings. And no amount of analyzing can stop life from being unpredictable. Instead of feeling safer, you become more anxious. Instead of finding peace, you dig deeper into uncertainty. And eventually, your emotional fuel runs out. Let me ask you, have you ever felt more tired after a day of doing nothing than a day full of activity? That's not laziness. That's your mind saying, "I'm exhausted from fighting battles no one else can see." Because overthinking turns everyday life into war. You question the way someone looked at you. You reread texts. You apologize for things that weren't wrong. You imagine worst-case scenarios at night and call it being realistic. But this isn't realism. It's emotional fatigue, dressed in the costume of logic. What makes it worse is that overanalyzing feels productive. You think, "I'm just trying to understand," or "I just need clarity." But there's a thin line between clarity and obsession. One gives you answers. The other gives you anxiety. In relationships, it's even more dangerous. You stop asking your partner real questions because you already answer them for them. In your head, you assume what they meant. You fill in the blanks. You become judge, jury, and executioner of emotional crimes that were never committed. And that destroys not only your peace, but your connection with others. Overanalyzing also impacts how you see yourself. You replay your mistakes like a broken record. You doubt your choices. You downplay your strengths and magnify your weaknesses. You start believing that everyone sees you through the same critical lens you see yourself through. And you begin to live more in your head than in the real world. So what can we do? How do we fight something that feels so normal? The first step is awareness. You must notice when your thoughts begin to spiral. Not every thought needs an answer. Not every silence needs to be filled with assumptions. Sometimes people are just tired. Sometimes their short replies mean nothing. Sometimes no reply is just that, no reply. You see, emotional exhaustion grows in the gap between what you assume and what's real. And every time you try to fill that gap with analysis instead of acceptance, You pay a price in peace, a price in rest, a price in joy. Let's go deeper. Emotionally exhausted people often carry one trait in common: hyper-awareness. They read people's body language too carefully. They sense every mood shift. They feel responsible for others' discomfort. And they often think, what did I do wrong, even when they did nothing? This hyper-awareness isn't a strength. It's trauma disguised as empathy. Because somewhere in their life, they learned that being careful is how you stay safe. But safety at the cost of emotional peace is a slow death. Overanalyzing becomes a mental habit, like biting your nails or checking your phone. Except here, you're checking people's intentions. You're biting into your own thoughts. And your brain is scrolling through imaginary dangers like a feed you can't turn off. So what's the antidote? Trust, not in others, but in yourself. Trust that if someone has a problem with you, they'll say it. Trust that silence doesn't always mean something's wrong. Trust that not everything needs a deeper meaning. And most of all, trust that your worth isn't based on how well you interpret others' reactions. Ladies and gentlemen, you deserve rest, not just physical, but emotional. And that rest begins the moment you stop believing every thought deserves your attention. The moment you stop treating your mind like a courtroom. And the moment you accept that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let it go. Overanalyzing will convince you that peace is on the other side of more thinking. But peace only comes when you stop fighting your thoughts. So today, if you've been feeling tired for no reason, if you feel like your brain won't turn off, if you've been trying to solve things that don't even exist yet, remember this. You're not broken. You're not weak. You're just emotionally exhausted. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to stop thinking and start healing. You always say yes, even when you want to say no. There's a kind of tiredness that sleep can't cure. It doesn't come from working too much or running errands all day. It comes from constantly choosing others over yourself. From saying yes when every part of you is screaming no inside. It comes from people-pleasing. And it's one of the fastest roads to emotional exhaustion. You might think you're being kind. You might believe you're just trying to keep the peace. But in reality, you're abandoning yourself piece by piece every time you agree to something that drains your spirit. This form of emotional exhaustion isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a dramatic breakdown. It shows up silently, in the form of chronic resentment, sudden mood crashes, random irritability, and a strange heaviness in your chest that you can't quite explain. It's that moment when someone asks you for something small, and your body feels like collapsing, not because it's a big request, but because it's one more withdrawal from an emotional bank account that's already empty. Most people who say yes too much don't realize how expensive it is, not in money, but in energy, time, and identity. You lose your authenticity. You say yes to events you don't want to attend, to favors you don't have time for, to conversations that make you shrink. And worst of all, you put yourself last on your own list. At first, it feels manageable. You convince yourself it's not a big deal. You say, it's just this once. But it never really is. Because people quickly learn that you're the yes person, reliable, agreeable, always there. And soon, they stop asking if you're available. They just assume you are. You train the world to treat you like someone whose boundaries don't need respect. And when you finally feel the weight of it all, it's not anger that hits you first. It's confusion. You wonder, why do I feel so drained all the time? Why don't I feel joy anymore? The answer is, you've been emotionally leaking for too long, and your body is tired of pretending to be okay. Psychologically speaking, people-pleasing is often rooted in fear. Fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of being disliked. Maybe you grew up in an environment where love was conditional, where being easy to handle earned you attention, while standing up for yourself brought punishment. Over time, your nervous system learned that safety came from compliance. So now, even as an adult, you confuse being liked with being loved. You think, if I keep everyone happy, maybe I'll be enough. But the truth is, saying yes all the time doesn't make people love you. It makes them use you, not always intentionally, but because you've set the pattern. And here's the dark irony. While you're trying so hard to be accepted, you're quietly losing the one person who matters most, yourself. You no longer recognize your real preferences. You forget what you want. You forget how to say, I need a break, or I'm not available, because the fear of disappointing others has become greater than the fear of abandoning yourself. Let me ask you, how many times have you said yes this week and instantly regretted it? How many times have you sacrificed your rest, your time, your boundaries, just to avoid the discomfort of saying no? That discomfort is temporary, but the cost of ignoring your own needs, that's lasting. And let's be clear, setting boundaries doesn't make you selfish. It makes you self-aware. There's a huge difference between being a kind person and being a people pleaser. One comes from strength, the other from fear. When you're emotionally exhausted from saying yes too much, your body begins to protest in subtle ways. You feel tired, even after a full night's sleep. You feel anxious before social interactions. You feel bitter toward people who never even asked you to say yes in the first place. They just accepted your offer because that's what you gave them. One of the hardest truths to accept is this. People will take as much as you give. They don't always know when you've hit your limit, because you never showed them where that line is. You hid your boundaries under a smile. You called it being nice, but deep down, you knew it was fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of letting people down. Fear of seeming difficult. But you know what's even harder than setting boundaries? Living a life where your own needs are always second, where you become the emotional dumping ground for others, where your worth is measured by how available you are, not how true you are to yourself. It's time to relearn the power of a respectful, firm, and necessary no. Not every invitation deserves your presence. Not every request is yours to fulfill. Not every emotion is yours to carry. Every time you say yes to something that drains you, you are saying no to something that could heal you. Your rest, your joy, your space to just be. So, how do you start changing it? Begin small. The next time someone asks for your time, pause. Don't say yes automatically. Ask yourself, do I want this? Do I have the energy for this? Will I feel resentment afterward? If the answer leans toward no, then honor that. You owe no one an explanation for protecting your peace. You'll feel guilty at first. You'll second-guess yourself. That's normal. Guilt is just your old pattern trying to survive. But every boundary you set is a brick in the foundation of your self-respect. Start by saying no to one thing this week. Then 2. Then 3. Notice how your body feels. Notice how your energy shifts. Notice how your peace begins to return. You are not here to be everything to everyone. You're not here to hold space for every broken person while yours keeps collapsing. You're not a machine, you're human. And that means you have limits. You deserve to be around people who respect your no as much as they appreciate your yes. You deserve relationships where you don't have to earn love through sacrifice. You deserve a life where your value isn't tied to how much you can carry, but how fully you can be yourself. So if you're feeling emotionally exhausted, ask yourself, am I tired because I've done too much? Or am I tired because I've given away too much of myself? Saying yes all the time may keep you liked, but saying no when you need to, that's what keeps you sane. And maybe, just maybe, you're not cold for setting boundaries. You're just finally warm enough with yourself to stop burning for everyone else. Your healing begins not when others change, but when you choose you. And sometimes that healing starts with a single powerful word. No. You wake up tired. Not because you didn't sleep, but because your mind never rested. There's a kind of exhaustion that no amount of sleep can fix. The kind where you close your eyes for 8 hours, your body lies still, but your mind never actually shuts off. You wake up the next morning with a heaviness in your chest, a fog in your brain, and a sense of dread that creeps in before your feet even touch the ground. You were asleep, but you were not resting. That's what emotional exhaustion looks like at its core. A quiet war happening inside your mind, even when the world outside seems peaceful. You lie in bed, your body begging for rest, but your thoughts are wide awake, rerunning conversations, replaying mistakes, rehearsing possible futures, overthinking your past, worrying about things that haven't happened, and things that probably never will. It's the kind of tired that feels like sadness in disguise. Not the kind of sadness that makes you cry, but the kind that makes everything feel heavy. You go through the motions, brushing your teeth, checking your phone, starting your day, but it feels like you're moving through mud. Every step takes more effort than it should. Every moment feels a little more fragile than you're willing to admit. When your mind never truly rests, it eats away at your energy, not all at once, but slowly, quietly. It drains you by making everything feel urgent. Every thought becomes a task. Every emotion becomes a question. Every silence becomes a problem that must be solved. And the worst part? It doesn't always look like a crisis on the outside. People may look at you and think you have it all together. You smile, you show up, you check all the boxes. But inside, you're carrying invisible weight. You're not tired from physical activity. You're tired from carrying thoughts that have never been unpacked. This kind of tiredness comes from living in a constant state of emotional high alert. It's what happens when your nervous system never feels truly safe. You may be physically still, but your brain is running scenarios, worst-case ones, most of the time. It's scanning for danger, for disappointment, for things that might go wrong. Because somewhere deep inside, your mind believes that staying prepared is the only way to stay safe. This isn't your fault. Many people who live with this pattern developed it as a survival mechanism. Maybe you grew up in an unpredictable home where you had to stay hyper-aware of others' moods just to protect yourself. Maybe you had experiences where things fell apart when you let your guard down. So now, as an adult, your brain doesn't know how to truly relax. Even in your most peaceful moments, there's a voice inside whispering, "Don't get too comfortable. Something could go wrong." And that's the thing about emotional exhaustion. It often hides under the surface. You can't point to it like a broken leg or fever, but it impacts everything. It shows up in your irritability, in your lack of motivation, in your short fuse, in your forgetfulness. You might think you're just overwhelmed or lazy or unproductive, but you're not. You're drained because your inner world hasn't known peace in a long time. And when the mind is constantly tense, the body follows. You wake up with tight shoulders, a clenched jaw, a racing heart. You might even get sick more often because your immune system is weakened by chronic stress. Your sleep may be long, but it's shallow. And the next day, everything feels 10 times harder than it should. You start to dread small things, opening emails, answering messages, making decisions. Not because they're hard, but because they add more noise to a brain that's already full. The clutter becomes overwhelming. You find yourself craving silence, not just around you, but inside you. That's what emotional exhaustion really is. A deep craving for silence, for stillness, for a moment where your mind doesn't have to fight, fix, or figure out anything. You may find yourself avoiding people. Not because you're antisocial, but because social interactions demand energy you no longer have. You may stop doing things you used to love. Not because you've changed, but because your spark has dimmed. You've been in survival mode for so long. Joy starts to feel like a luxury you can't afford. But here's the truth. You were not meant to live like this. You were not designed to be in a constant mental marathon. There's a part of you that remembers what peace felt like. And that part of you is still there, buried under all the noise. It's not gone. It's just waiting for you to slow down, to breathe, to stop trying to control things you were never meant to carry alone. The solution isn't just more sleep. It's deeper rest, mental rest, emotional rest, and that begins with permission. Permission to unplug, to let the messages sit unread for a little while, to let the dishes wait, to say no when something doesn't feel right, to cancel plans that your body isn't ready for, to admit that you're not okay and that you don't have to be. You need moments where you can be still without guilt, where your mind doesn't feel the need to explain or justify or prove anything. You need spaces, even if small, where you feel safe enough to simply exist, without performing, without pleasing, without pretending. Sometimes, healing begins not with doing more, but with doing less. Start by noticing your thoughts without chasing them, When your mind begins to spiral, ask gently, is this helpful right now? Not everything that enters your mind deserves your full attention. Not every thought is urgent. Not every worry is real. Practice releasing, not because you don't care, but because your peace is more important. Turn off the news. Put the phone down. Step outside. Let your nervous system remember what calm feels like, and don't wait for burnout to force you into rest. Choose rest because you deserve it, because your worth isn't measured by how productive or available you are, because healing isn't a reward for suffering long enough. It's your right. If you wake up tired even after sleeping, that's your body talking. If you feel overwhelmed by the smallest tasks, that's your mind waving a red flag. Listen to it. Honor it. There is no medal for pushing through pain in silence. But there's freedom in learning to rest, in learning to care for yourself the way you've always cared for others. You're allowed to not be okay. You're allowed to slow down. You're allowed to take a breath and not feel guilty about it. You are not weak for needing rest. You are wise for recognizing when it's time. Because the truth is, waking up tired every day isn't a sign of failure. It's a signal that your soul is asking for something deeper than sleep. It's asking for peace, for healing, for silence, for safety. And when you start giving that to yourself, not in big dramatic changes, but in small, quiet acts of self-respect, that's when true rest begins. Not just at night, but in your spirit, in your breath, in your life. And when your mind rests, you truly wake up. So now you know, emotional exhaustion isn't just about having too much to do. It's about carrying too much that no one else can see. You overanalyze everything, constantly stuck in loops of what if and why did I? You say yes, even when every fiber of your being is begging you to say no. You sleep for hours, yet wake up more tired than before, because your mind has been in overdrive all night. And maybe for the longest time, you thought that was normal, that this was just how life feels. But it's not. You're not broken. You're not too sensitive. You're simply emotionally exhausted from overthinking, overgiving, and overriding your own needs in silence. But exhaustion is not your final chapter. It's a signal, a cry from within, asking you to slow down, to protect your peace, to choose your own well-being, not out of guilt, but out of self-respect. The truth is, you don't need to fix everything. You don't need to be everything. You just need to be honest with yourself. It's okay to take a step back, to breathe, to let go, because healing doesn't always begin with doing more. Sometimes it begins the moment you finally give yourself permission to rest, and maybe today is that moment.